Well, this is a photograph of the squad of us when we were training at Scarborough. And as you can see, one of the things that indicated that we were trainee aircrew is the little white badge you'll see in the cap. And as a matter of interest, of the people you can see there, that one is myself. Slightly of interest, this gentleman here, an officer who was one of the training people, he particularly was training us in aircraft recognition, which, to be truthful, most of us lads were pretty good at already. But the thing with him is he would keep on about looking for dihedral from the root. So amongst us lads, he wasn't known by his name, he was simply known as dihedral from the root. Thought you might be a little interested in that. When you're ready, right. Having proudly received my RAF pilot's wings, I now found myself one of a number of lads sitting in a Sunderland flying boat, and this was to transport us from the very south of the African continent to the very north. Because the Sunderland was so slow, it was a 2-day journey with a short stop overnight in Lake Victoria at a small field in Uganda. But it was just a question of having a sleep, a breakfast, and getting back on the aircraft. And one thing I will say is that on the second day, that Sunderland landed at Khartoum, but it was only to, I don't know whether they were picking somebody up or dropping somebody off. But the thing I do remember was that I was sitting at the side of the aircraft and looking out of the window, and for the very first time in my life, I was to see sitting on a post there, sitting on it, that post was a vulture. And as I say, this was the very first time I was to see one. And I thought it was the most vicious, unpleasant looking bird that I'd ever seen, and it certainly was. Little did I realise that in the coming months and years I was to see hundreds of these birds in the Far East. And to be fair to the birds, they do a very important job over there in disposing a lot of the flesh disposal and that you get out in that part of the world. So yes, they are a nasty, vicious looking animal, but they do a useful job in the Far East, and I was to see hundreds of them in due course. But my very first sight was at Khartoum, sitting on the Nile there, and how vicious that thing looked, I always remember. And so on we go, and we, in due course that evening, landed on the Nile at Cairo, based in Cairo for about a fortnight, which gave me the opportunity to visit the pyramids, which is a memory of considerable fun. And after that fortnight, I found myself transported to Ismailia, which is by the Suez Canal. And the first fortnight was to be spent converting onto the Mark II Hurricane aircraft. Having had that fortnight to do a number of short cross countries and just flying around the odd aerobatics, etc., nothing too desperate to get used to the aircraft. That took about a fortnight. At the end of that fortnight, they said, right, up to now we have taught you to take off, land safely, to navigate an aircraft, to look after the aircraft in the air. We are now going to teach you to use these things as a weapon of war. And for the first time I was to find myself firing live ammunition at targets on the ground. And also targets in the air that were being towed. What brave lads they were that were flying the aircraft towing the target, believe me. However, and we also, one of the exercises was go up to about 15,000 feet to get used to using oxygen above 12,000 feet. And basically that was it. We finished up by doing what we call tail chases, which was to get us used to the situation should we meet enemy fighters in the future, and you know, get involved with them. And I can tell you some of those tail chases got pretty bloody dangerous, although nobody actually did get hurt. But I sometimes admit I feel surprised that those tail chases got pretty bloody dangerous, I can tell you. Anyway, we came to the end of 6 weeks of that, and I had been expecting to finish up in Italy, joining a squadron there, but it was not to be that. I was to find myself one of 40 lads sitting in a 4-engine transport heading east. We were on our way to India. Duly arrived in India, and not too long after landing in India, I was to find myself one of the 40 lads, and we found ourselves posted to Bangalore in southern India, and there we were converted from the Hurricanes to the P-47 Thunderbolt. And the P-47 Thunderbolt is a very large aircraft for a single-engine aircraft. It was, in fact, throughout the Second World War, the largest single-engine aircraft of any of the countries taking part in the Second World War. It was also exceedingly heavy, as my memory tells me. Without any ammunition or armament on board, it would weigh somewhere around about 8 tons, which was more than twice the Hurricane, at least. However, to take care of that weight, there was a huge radial engine, 24 cylinders, and in 3 banks of 8. And when you had it on full throttle, you were getting approaching 2,800 horsepower. And that was well over 1,000 horsepower more than anything I've been in control of before. They're also, for emergencies and for short periods only, what's the word I want? In other words, you could put the throttle through a further section, and this would give you an extra about 200 horsepower. So as near as damn it, you've got 3,000 horsepower, but you can only use that in an emergency and for not longer than about 10 minutes at the most. But it was there if you needed it. I never did recall having to use it. So this was a pretty big, heavy aircraft, which meant that it needed about 25% more runway before it would let the wheels take to the air. And the very first time I was to take one of these into the air, I certainly haven't been well and truly warned, was to find that I did need about another 25% of runway. But I will say this, once that aircraft took to the air, it did it very comfortably. What would happen was we would be at 10,000 feet as we approached the target in the appropriate formation, and we would peel off one after the other about 5 to 10 seconds after each other, the 12 aircraft. We would peel over And believe it or not, to start with, you would throttle back a bit, because you had to bear in mind now, not only was that powerful engine pulling you down, but gravity is having to go as well. And if you didn't throttle back, you would get farther. In actual fact, you would get very close to the speed of sound. You could. Actually, there were aircraft lost because of that, because they lost. Yeah. And so having throttled back a certain amount, at about 3,000 feet, you would start your pull out, count to 5. The dive you were in would be about 90 degrees, not quite 30. No, 80 degrees, 80, because 90 is vertical, isn't it? No, the dive would be about 80 degrees, just short of vertical. So when you started your pull out, a gentle pull out to start with, you count to 5 to overcome that 5 degree difference. Then you let your bombs go, just by pressing on top of the stuff. Then you increase your pull out, and you would usually level out at somewhere about 1,000 to 500 feet, thereabouts. And you would find, if you looked at your airspeed indicator, you got an airspeed of about 650 miles an hour. And in those days, that was considered quite quick. And so we would join up again in formations, and each formation would approach the target area of grain. We would strafe the area, climb to 10,000 feet, back home. And so these were the operations we now got involved in. And then there was another change occasionally. We would take off from Jumshire and travel over to Cox's Bazaar, which was on the coast. It was a permanent airfield. We'd been there a good many years, way before the war. Underneath our wings, we would have 2 fuel tanks, but they were empty. And having landed at Cox's Bazaar, we would get out, and there was an American unit mixing napalm. And they would fill those tanks with napalm, and also a small explosive item on top with no safety measure, which was bloody dangerous. And once they'd been filled up, of course, we got back into the aircraft. Now, what we were getting up to was this. We didn't know this at the time, but the Japanese had decided to get out of Burma altogether. And so they were working their way in the Arakan down so they could cross over from the west to the east, that to try and stop our troops on the ground overtaking the Japanese who were trying to get down further south to cross over to Thailand. They'd got these units of what they, for the better word, it's my word actually, but it's these sort of kamikaze units of men. And their object was there. They didn't expect to live, but they were there to try and hold up our army people who were brothers. And our thing to use, because they'd got themselves entirely well trenched in, was napalm. And so what we were attacking were these Japanese. And to be perfectly honest, it was probably the most dangerous bloody job that we did as well. Because you had to drop them from round about anything between 100 and 150 feet, which is not too much off the bloody ground. And you had to be out of the way before they bloody well exploded. Oh no, you weren't. It was a shallow, no, it was a shallow one, yes. Not that. The fact you were coming in low down also, you were an easier target, exactly. So it was probably one of the most dangerous things we bloody well did. That exactly. But I don't know. I don't know of anybody that actually didn't safely get through it. And I can't remember exactly how many of these napalm drops I did, but it was probably about 4 or 5 or something like that. Indeed. And so as the Japanese were getting further and further south, 30 Squadron were able to move even further south, and we moved to a permanent airfield called Akian. And it was only about a week before we got there, the Japanese had been using it. And also the operations we did changed quite drastically. Dive bombing no longer. And so what we were doing now were patrols. And we were patrolling the roads, the rivers, railway lines, etc. in the south, because we were so far south now, we didn't need any fuel tanks underneath. But we usually did it as a flight of 4 aircraft. And so for the next 2 weeks, I was involved in these patrols over the southern area of Burma. And I'll give you an example of 2, quite a number of them. The first one has got a little bit of a chuckle in it in a way. We were travelling down a railway line. There was the 4 of us to the flight, and we were roughly about 1,500 feet, I suppose. And we're suddenly ahead of us on this railway line. We could see puffs of smoke coming up, which meant there must be a steam engine down there. And what a lovely little target that was going to be. The only thing is, as we got and reached him, he'd gone into a tunnel. Now, we were quite familiar with this tunnel because we had been down there a number of occasions before. And myself and number 1 managed to get one shot at the last couple of carriages that were on this train, or trucks they were, not carriages, they were trucks. And he disappeared into the tunnel. Now this was quite a long tunnel, and we were quite familiar with it. And it was probably damn near a quarter of a mile long, this tunnel. And so we flew to the other end, waiting for him to come out. But he was a bit wiser than that, and I suppose he did what, anyway, he decided to stop for a cup of tea or whatever the Japanese had. And he wasn't going to come out while we were still there. And he had the advantage of us. He was on the ground, he could stand still. We were in the air, and we were limited to how long we could stay.